As we teach, one of my very biggest concerns is that people not walk away with questions, things that don't make sense to them, sometimes that may even seem nonsensical, because I know it leaves people thinking, well, there are things in here that don't belong. Some things are true, other things are not, and I don't know how to tell one from the other. A few weeks ago, we had this situation where Paul is on the road to Damascus, and he is blinded by this light struck down, and he hears a voice saying, Paul, Paul, or Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he responds, who are you, Lord? And I've heard and read any number of people saying, well, that's just silly. If you know it's God, then why would you ask this question? If you go to the trouble of saying, Lord, why would you say, who are you? It's like me going to someone and saying, who are you, Frank? Or when was the Battle of 1812 fought? You just don't ask some questions. But it really does make sense. And it really is not at all strange. But to understand it, we have to first go back to the Old Testament and we have to go back to words. The Hebrew language has the Jewish people, numerous words that they use to refer to God. One that a lot of people, most people are familiar with is Yahweh. It's really Yehovah, but Yahweh. And there's a place where Moses is listening to God, God speaking to him, and says, I revealed myself to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, but I didn't tell them my name. And he says, my name is Yahweh. There's another word that gets used a lot in the Old Testament to refer to God, and it's El, E-L. And it shows up a lot more than you know, because nearly any time you see a Hebrew name, a Bible name that has El in it, it's referring to God. And so Gabriel the angel, Gabriel, my strength, God, or God is my strength. It was prophesied that Jesus would be known as Emmanuel, which means God with us. And it makes perfect sense. So El is in there often. There's that situation where Moses is being told that he's to go rescue his people, and he doesn't want the job. He's scared, and he's making excuses. And one of them, he says, what if these Israelites, because remember, he's really an Egyptian at this point to them. What if these Israelites ask me, I tell them that the God of your ancestors has sent me, and they say, what is his name? What if they ask me, what's his name? And God tells him, you tell them, Hayah, I am. You tell them, Hayah has sent you. And it means what it sounds like. I exist, I am, and that's all you need to know. And it means a little more than you might suspect, because in Hebrew, for instance, if you want to say, I'm hungry, you use the word I, you use the word hungry, there's no am. That I am is reserved almost exclusively for God, that first person singular. You tell them, I am. That'll settle it. But there's another word that they use often, which is Adonai. Adonai really means Lord. It can refer to a king. It can refer to, if you're a slave, it can refer to that person who owns you, who's your master. If someone's who is obviously a wealthy dignitary, let's say the wise men that come, if they encounter common people, they might call that person, that wise man, they might refer to them as Adonai. It means Lord. It's also understood, though, to refer to God as sort of the Lord of Lords. There's one particular place in a psalm that I just saw a little bit ago where he talks about um, Adonai Yahweh, the Lord God. All of these words, they all have different implications, different nuances. And so later, if you're going to try and take this into another language to teach other people, they don't have all of these words already built into their language. And so you just kind of have to reach out and grab a word in their language that means something similar and go with it. And then at some point, as you talk more, you begin to teach them about the implications. You begin to do what I'm doing. And so we have this situation where Paul is on the road to Damascus. He's struck blind and he says, "Who are you, Lord?" And we have it in Greek. And the Greek word that they reached out and grabbed is kurio. Many of you have seen it as Kyrie, Kyrie, because we take things to English and English letters. And you see it Kyrie eleison, you see it in hymns, you see it in prayers, you see it in confessions. It's kurio. And kurio is probably closest to Adonai. It is Lord. So if you get called before a king, for better or worse, and that you address that person, you would say kurio. Just like in the Old Testament, in Hebrew, they would say Adonai. It can mean God. It can refer to other types of lords. And so Paul struck down, here's the voice, and he says, "Who are you, Lord? Who are you, kurio?" He recognizes this is something powerful, but it's also probably the idea that he doesn't know at that time for sure who this is. I'll go ahead and skip forward. I hate to do that to you. Later on, Paul is telling this same story to King Agrippa, and he gives more detail than comes out in the version that we've read so far. He explains more, and he says, Paul said, "I heard a voice speak to me in Hebrew." And so chances are Paul responded in Hebrew, in which case he would have said, "Who are you, Adonai?" They don't tell you that yet, and they don't really tell you later on, "Who are you, Adonai?" And then when it gets turned to Greek, it's "Who are you, Kurio?" So there's nothing unbelievable about the question. It makes perfect sense. Now we flash forward to this last week, and Peter has gone to Joppa. He's going to stay in this house. It's noon. He's hungry, and waiting for food. He falls into this trance and has a vision where he sees something like a sheet with all these prohibited animals on it, things that Jews are not allowed to eat, and a voice that says to him, "Here, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter responds basically, "No way, Lord. Not a chance, Lord." And the word there is kurio again. Now, the first thing I want you to think about, if he's talking to God, and I think he does understand this is God speaking to him or an angel, and he says no. Now, we go back to being before a king. If the king says jump, you say, "How high?" What you don't say is, "No, not going to do it." And yet Peter feels justified in speaking back to some representative God and saying, "No, I won't do it." And that should tell you how deeply ingrained these dietary laws are. They are God's laws, they say, and yet I'm going to tell God, "No, I'm not listening to you. I'm listening to the first thing I got taught." Then what we're told, the response is, "Then said Theos," speaking back to him in response, Theos. There's another word for God. This one is the only other one we really have, and it's unmistakable now. They're saying that God is speaking to him. And God speaks back and says, don't call, well, I should have covered, but when Peter speaks back and says, I'm not gonna eat this, he says, I've never eaten anything that was common or unclean. And this common means base, beneath me. It's not the same as unclean. And he mentions both. I've never eaten anything common or unclean. And Theos speaks back to him. God speaks back to him and says, don't you, and it's pretty severe. Don't you call anything common that I've made clean. And it's an admonition. I mean, it is definitely a command. Don't you dare call anything common that I've made unclean. And he uses both of those words. Luke doesn't waste words. And in the first instance, Peter responds back, I won't do that, Curio. I won't do that, Lord. And it's God who speaks back to him. Luke is very good about things like this. Theos spoke to him and said, don't you call anything common. And this is where we recognize also that it's not talking about food because of what's about to happen. We easily recognize that he's being prepared. He's being told, don't call any person base, common, that I have made clean or kosher. They're all my children. And it has implications for us because that would have been us. That would have been us automatically looked at as common and unclean. But it also is an admonition to us, just like it was to Peter. Don't you dare look at anyone else and see them as anything other than my children. And don't you dare think of them as uncouth or common or base, because I've made them clean. You go and tell them. There's a lot wrapped up in the words, and the more we understand, the more things make sense, and the fewer seeming inconsistencies we see. I hope it helps, and I hope I see a lot of you on Sunday.